In this video, we're going to take a further look at some of the useful modules in the GL section and some of the ways which we can control them with a little bit more accuracy. Okay, so let's first of all start off with our usual rectangle and window. So that rectangle was generator rectangle. The window is a GL window. Let's put that down the bottom. Let's just connect those up. Let's turn our window on, like so. Brilliant. Let's just bring my window over a little bit there. Okay, great. So, within the GL section, if you remember, that's the main section we're going to use to modify this OpenGL pipeline. So, right-click, insert module, GL. Now, there's quite a lot of different modules in here. Some of them are for very specific, quite complex uses. Some of them are for more general use. Some of these I use very rarely, and some of them I use very, very regularly. Obviously, the window module is one of the most regular ones that I use. Now, if we want to actually control this rectangle we've got here, some of the key ones we've got rotate, scale. We've got translate, which is our position, so let's start throwing those in. So get my translate, GL rotate, and GL scale. Cool. And all I'm going to do, I'm just going to put them in line in this order. Now obviously the order that you have your modules addressed will adjust the final output. So for instance, if I scale first and then translate, I'll get a different result to if I translate and scale. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. So, most of these modules would do what we would expect. I'm going to take the scale down, like so. Now, I'm just using the overall scale there, which is going to scale on all axes at the same time. But you can see that we actually have separate controls there for the different axes. As far as the rotation goes, we've got our basic rotation control, and we choose the axis on which we are rotating, like so. And we've got this kind of custom one as well, which sort of varies on the content. Sometimes it kind of pumps, sometimes it doesn't. So on the translate module, again, we've got X position, Y position, and Z position. We won't see the Z at the moment because we're just seeing a two-dimensional view. If we wanted to see in 3D, we'd have to put a camera in line. That's another thing that we'll visit. We'll have a separate 3D tutorial. Now, let us say that we want to adjust these with a little bit more precision. So, obviously, I can move my controller until it gets to the parameter value that I want. We see the value there next to the mouse. Or we can right click and we can actually choose some preset values, but sometimes you want to go for a very specific value that's not shown there. So I'm going to extend the side of the module. I'm going to select all of the components by holding control, dragging around them all, and then moving them all to the right. Brilliant. I'm just going to pull the bottom of my box down a little bit as well there. Now, if I right-click and I show parameter, I want to expose these three modification amounts, and on the ports, I want to expose the modification port. Now, this will allow us to have separate X, Y, and Z modification. However, I could also use a vector input, so that would allow me to specify the numbers, like we saw with the colour. Our position, X, Y, and Z, is actually three numbers making that overall value. So that's what I'm going to do, in fact. I'm going to choose the vector in. Now, I also know that this particular module has an alternate skin with the vector in set up already. So, in fact, we're just going to choose that. Now, when we choose the vector input, the vector values that we send override the module values, which is why it's removed the controls for us. There's no need for us to see them at the moment. If you remember previously when we used a vector, we had to combine the values together to create the vector. So that was our math section and our vector join. I'm going to put that one just next to the translate module and connect that one up. Then what I'd like some entry boxes in there. So we're going to use a controller constant. Now I can just duplicate this controller 3 times. We can have one of those going into each box like so. There we go. And so then when I move that, we get some variation. Now, because of the ways these controllers are initially set up, they're just set up to work in positive numbers. Now, we could go into the controller. If you remember, we could control right click on there. We could go to control properties. We could change that range. But actually, what I think we'll do is we'll turn this into a number box instead. So if you right click on the module and choose load alternate skin and choose text. And I'm just going to repeat that on each of those. There we go. And what that means now is we can actually type in numbers. So I'm going to put 000. So 000 is our very center. Now, if I hold Shift and Control and roll with my mouse, you can see that I can change that value. And I can actually go beyond the default 0 to 1 range. I can go right into the negative, right into the positive, however I want. So sometimes I use this technique if I want to place something in a very, very precise position within my patch. Okay, so our translate, that gives us our position. Our rotation, let's maybe put that one onto an LFO. So if you remember, the LFO was the thing that adjusted the value. So it was controller LFO, like so. And then let's increase the amount of modification there and put that onto maybe the Z axis. There we go. The reason it's spinning off-center is something which we'll talk about in another tutorial. This is the way that OpenGL processes. Mostly it will work as expected, but on the odd occasion it will do something a little bit unexpected like this. I can fully explain what that is for another time. So, translate, rotate, scale. Let's maybe have something on the scale as well. Now if I go to load alternate skin, we've got the modification that I made earlier, or we've got XYZ. So I'm going to just copy a couple of LFOs, plug one into X and one into Z, increase my Y, increase my amount. You can see that's changing its height now. Let's change the X as well, and then let's just put them on slightly different speeds so they're not all running at the same tempo. There you go. So just using those OpenGL modules and varying what we've got there, I'm going to just open that up a little bit more so you can see slightly better. You can see we're already starting to get some kind of crazy generative shapes popping around, which is really quite nice. And so this is just literally just playing around with just standard OpenGL modules. Just for reference, the modules that we do use in the OpenGL section, the GL section of the modules, they are essentially the OpenGL language, but presented in a modular form. So a lot of the functions that you see here, they might not seem initially intuitive, and that is because they are strictly coding functions. So things like render delay, render display list, stuff like that, render target are very specific functions, and really working with it in these modules just makes it so much easier. I'm going to leave you to really experiment with the OpenGL section. One of the real key things with AI is that you should just jump in and not be afraid. And as long as you remember those basic connection rules, and remember that it's not going to let you make a bad connection, you can really experiment. Some other useful ones in here, blend mode. This will let you have different types, create different types of blending in your patches. Again, we'll do a specific tutorial on that one. And there's loads of other useful things. Render to texture we used earlier. Ortho changes your perspective view to an orthographic view should you need to. And there's loads of other interesting ones there as well. There's some texture ones there as well, which are actually designed to work on the green ports, but are part of the OpenGL specification, which is why they're in there. But again, you've got things like rotation, scaling, translation of that green texture signal. So the OpenGL section is a really good place to start if you want to modify and manipulate your input. So don't be afraid to dive in, experiment, and see what happens.